abuzz with shock. The safety of children has come under the spotlight. Amy-Leigh was returned home in the early hours of this morning, and police are still investigating because the people who took her have not yet been arrested. But let's delve deeper now into the crime of kidnapping. How prevalent is it, and what can we do about it? We're joined by forensic clinical psychologist Gerard Labuskaghni. Gerard, a very good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for coming in. So, when something as dramatic as a child being snatched at the entrance to her school happens, what is the procedure from there in just trying to find the child in as quick and safe way as possible?
Yeah, well, of course, I mean, in those situations, to report it to the police immediately. What is standard procedure for SAPS is that what should happen once you've reported it is that the SAPS hostage negotiators get involved. And you really would have two parallel processes. You'd have the investigators who are trying to find the suspects, and that continues way after the victim's been released. And you, of course, have the negotiators whose sole purpose is to get this person back as soon as possible and safely.
And Amy-Leigh's story, of course, has had a good ending. She was taken yesterday morning, returned in the early hours of this morning, we're told. But overall, what is the success rate in negotiating the release of children and other people who are kidnapped in South Africa for whatever reason?
Yeah. Well, first, I mean, children are not the typical target for your standard kind of ransom kidnappings. It's usually going to be males, but in the 20s and 40s, it's about 70% of the time. So it's not very common that you get it. Of course, it gets a lot of media attention when it happens, and there's some good and bad points about the media attention. So again, and most frequently, it's actually domestic custody-related kidnappings of children. It's not really the full ransom types. And those tend to be, when they are for ransom, very much pre-planned, targeted. They've chosen a particular person, they've followed their routine and found the best time to sort of snatch that individual. And that's very difficult to sort of plan against. I think one would have to look, are you the type of person who would be the victim? Or is your family the type of family that might be the victim of a ransom kidnapping? And those tend to be families that have sort of a wealthy background, And I think anybody who has, if you look at the types of kidnappings we've had over the past few years in South Africa, the high-profile ones, it is typically your very successful family-owned businesses where people are targeted. But children, again, it's tend to be more your domestic sort of kidnapping, custody-related kidnappings is your typical kind of kidnapping that we get.
And you said the most kidnapped, if you will, category of people in South Africa are young males. What is it about them that makes them such a target?
Yeah. Again, I mean, kidnappings are not one set thing. You've got different reasons for kidnappings. It spans from the person a group of people who grab someone and take them to an ATM and won't release them until they've drawn the few 100,000 rand that's in the ATM, to, on the other side of the spectrum, these sort of very high-profile, pre-planned, high-value kidnappings that take place. And in between that, you have a sort of different spectrum. So all of those would influence who's been targeted and why. People don't go randomly and pick up someone and ask for 5, 10, 15, 20 million. That would have been determined beforehand. If we're going to choose this particular person as a target, can that family actually pay? The lower the amount tends to be more your chances. And unfortunately, your success at being released safely is much better if you're kidnapped by professionals, although you might be kept for far longer. The risks are when you have unprofessional people, and they're usually going for the lower amounts in terms of kidnappings. These are the people who are easily spooked. They're not good at doing this. They're cautious about getting caught. And that's when a lot of media attention can actually cause those individuals to decide that they're going to cut their losses and actually kill the victim and cover up their tracks to get away with it. And that's why a lot of the media attention sometimes can actually have a negative effect. In your high-value kidnappings, it can actually increase the ransom. And with your unprofessional kidnappings, it can actually endanger the life of the actual victim.
How then do we balance, Gerard, the need and how crucial the media attention is in just raising the alarm, as well as the concern for the safety of the person who's been taken? Because eventually you do need to get as many people as possible if you're hoping to maybe get information on where the captors may be or where they may have taken the person.
So yeah, I mean, I think we have to balance, obviously, the members of the public can bring forward any information they might even think could be remotely relevant to a centralized individual. So I think it's important for the police to say, if you have any information, contact this particular individual, that make sure that information gets to the necessary people who are dealing with the case. But as I said, on the other side, too much attention can also cause the harm. You're not going to have a sudden spate of these, so it's not like a serial murderer where we have to warn the public out there to be careful. And I think the general safety tips that most people should be taking are the ones that in general you should be taken on a daily basis. Be aware of strangers, be aware of your environment, etc.
Is there any way then, Gerard, to mentally prepare for this sort of ordeal, or do we all just go about just hoping that nothing of this extent happens to us.
Yeah, like I said, I think if you are a family that is relatively wealthy, you might want to get a security assessment of your situation by professionals who can advise you whether you need a certain level of security around you and your family. But for the average person, it's very difficult to know. You don't want to go to extremes where you live in a complete bubble and you don't do anything because of the minute risk that you're going to be kidnapped. So I think, are you a potential likely target? A lot of the other reasons why children are sometimes taken is that there's a debt that's owed to someone. And I'm not saying that's happened in this particular case, but often we might find there's a drug debt owed between two parties. The children are taken as leverage to make sure that money's paid over.
And like you're saying, it's important to stress that in this particular story with Amy-Leigh, we don't know why she was taken or who took her yesterday morning. I want us to speak about the psychological impact of such an attack, such an event on a child as young as Amy-Leigh, only 6 years old, taken from her mother's car, with possibly what we think at this point was a group of people that she did not know. How does a kid come back from that sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is even for adults. I mean, I've worked a lot of adult cases of people who've been gone for a few months, and this is incredibly traumatic. And although the initial phase, they're incredibly relieved to be out and they're just happy to be home and they think everything's fine, you definitely want to get anybody, even a girl who's been for such a short period of time as Amy-Leigh, to go for some kind of counseling on an ongoing basis to see how this is going to have impact upon her. Obviously, the longer the kidnapping, the greater the impact upon the individual. It's that loss of control. You don't know when this is going to end, etc. So definitely, even if a person looks good and just happy to be back, you really almost want to force them into some kind of sort of therapeutic process for an extended period of time.
And I imagine a gradual return then to what they knew as normal life.
Yeah, and the longer you're away, of course, the more gradual you want to have that return into your existence.
Just as far as the police, because you mentioned how the first thing really, what's most important is to get the SAPS involved as soon as possible, hostage negotiators and that sort of thing. Do we have the sort of skill that is needed? Do we have enough of it?
Yeah. Look, definitely, I think there's one thing I can say that I'm quite happy about in terms of one of the SAPS units, and that's the hostage negotiators are very well trained in South Africa, very well experienced. So definitely I would suggest getting them involved. And as I said, there's two parallel processes, the investigation side and the negotiation side. The negotiators are incredibly successful at getting the victim back alive and with a relative period of time. On the investigation side, the more professional these people are, the less chance you're going to catch them. And if you look at, again, the high-profile cases that have been in South Africa over the past 3 or 4 years of these wealthy businessmen who've been kidnapped, not a single one of those suspects have ever been caught. So the more professional the organization, the less likely you're going to get them back. So these ideas that we're going to have this tactical release, the police are going to catch the suspects and release the victim, is pretty much a pipe dream in the majority of instances.
So it's not as dramatic as we see in a Hollywood movie.
No, and that's, of course, the most dangerous time for the hostage is the abduction point and, of course, the tactical release point are the two most dangerous times for the hostage.
All right, Gerard Labuschagne, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.
That was forensic clinical psychologist Gerard Labuschagne speaking to us.